The G7 this week here in Canada will be the first international summit of President Trump's second term, and it will be a good window into how he plans to use these international gatherings to address some of the world's stickiest issues, the biggest of which is this conflict between Israel and Iran. That will really be the overhang. I think a lot of the world leaders who are gathering here want to hear out and suss out President Trump on exactly how he sees that conflict going. Of course, he says that he thinks there is still room for diplomacy, but there are a lot of questions about how exactly that would proceed. And in fact, earlier Sunday, President Trump said that he thought the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, might be able to mediate this conflict, but already at least one other G7 leader, the French president, Emmanuel Macron, has said that he doesn't think that that's a workable option. So already you see some differences emerging even before this summit begins. You know, discord and acrimony really colored these kinds of summits during President Trump's first term in office. And I'm thinking specifically back to the last time Canada hosted a G7 back in 2018. Kind of the enduring image of that summit was of President Trump sort of glowering with his arms crossed, and the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe sort of leaning over him as they tried to hash out this joint statement that President Trump later tore up as he left the summit site. The hosts of this week's gathering do want to avoid that open level of acrimony, and to that end, they don't plan on releasing a joint communique. They'll release some shorter individual statements instead. And instead of sort of these large, lengthy group meetings that sort of go on, they're planning more one-on-one time for the president to meet some of his counterparts. Of course, Ukraine will be a big topic at the G7, just as it has been for the last 3 years. President Trump has made clear his differences with some of the European leaders, particularly when it comes to applying new sanctions on Moscow. Of course, trade talks are the other big topic that have caused divisions between President Trump and his counterparts, and we are approaching that July 9th deadline that the president has set to negotiate all of these new trade deals in order to avoid some of the harsh new tariffs. And there are leaders here that are in active conversations with the president about trade, whether it's Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, or Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, who is an invited guest of this year's G7. Now, whether President Trump is actually able to make progress on those trade deals or whether this will continue to be a point of contention, I think remains to be seen. But certainly it is a very stacked agenda for President Trump and his counterparts as they gather here in Canada for the G7.
The largest manhunt in Minnesota state history. 57-year-old Vance Boelter has been captured and arrested. He's facing a second-degree charge of murder and also a charge of attempted second-degree murder. He will be in court for the first time later this afternoon.
One man's unthinkable actions have altered the state of Minnesota.
The intense search for Vance Boelter coming to an end in the woods in rural Sibley County, Minnesota.
The suspect crawled to law enforcement teams and was placed under arrest at that point in time.
Boelter on the run for roughly 43 hours after authorities say he killed State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband Saturday at their Brooklyn Park home. The suspected gunman then attacked State Senator John Hoffman and his wife at their house in nearby Champlin. Both survived.
I'm very proud to tell you that we took the suspect into custody who is responsible for this.
Police calling the manhunt the largest in state history, involving hundreds of detectives and 20 different SWAT teams. Their quick action may have prevented more attacks.
If that had not happened, I have every confidence that this would have continued throughout the day.
Governor Tim Walz praising law enforcement for their efforts to capture Boelter while honoring Representative Hortman.
Melissa Hortman was the core of who our values were,
promising justice for the victims of this political violence.
and you can rest assured that we will put every ounce of effort that the state of Minnesota has to make sure that justice is served and the individual responsible for this serves the time for the unspeakable act.
Officials used infrared technology as well as drones and helicopters. Police say that he crawled out of the woods and to law enforcement after he was surrounded in the city where he lives. No officers were injured during the hunt and arrest.